Let's get really started. Let's respect everyone who joined on time. Hopefully we will have more people. So far it's not that great, but not everybody can make it 2 consecutive days. That's why we have the recording. So we reached our last study group session for the spring term. And our today's topic is assessment, analyzing, and evaluating. So before we open it to to Q&A, let's talk very briefly what is expected to be covered in the section. This is taken from the book, from the handbook, from people preparing for the exam. So analyzing is characterized as the methodical examination of information for purposes of explanation and interpretation. Evaluating is the subsequent critical assessment of authenticity, integrity, compliance level, significance, adequacy, and quality of a process, system, physical entity. Sounds complicated, so let's take a look what we might be analyzing and evaluating. Compliance, meaning all kinds of situations of, is this in compliance? Is it out of compliance? And we always take applicable regulatory requirements. And talking about GCP, it really depends on where you are located. If you are located in the US, you follow the Code of Federal Regulations. A lot of GCP is there, but some things are not there and some things are adapted for local environment. If you are sitting in other places of the world, countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, GCP, as it is made part of the regulation. So there is nothing like, it's no longer a guidance document, it's a part of regulation, meaning what is there should be followed. And there is no excuse if it's not. But also, what the inspectors and auditors would be evaluating is if we have a study and compliance with the protocol. We have SOPs. Do we follow our SOPs? Or if it's we have wonderful SOPs, but nobody follows them, then it's a problem, really. Vendor qualifications and suitability. That's another part where we may need to analyze and evaluate. Adequacy of auditee resources to complete contractual obligations. Adequacy of remediation activities. There is a CAPA plan, and we need to evaluate, and we should also evaluate upfront before it's implemented, whether it's supposed to be adequate when it is implemented. And then we have the evaluation after implementation to see, is it really worked as we expected? And then completeness, accuracy, reliability, and validity of study data. Informed consent process, participant privacy and protection in a study. Physical and logical security procedures, trends, for example, in observations, deviations, kappas, data trends, and so on. For trends, we always need reasonable amount of time. You cannot see a trend within 1 week. You may see maybe something that triggers your attention and looks strange, but that's not necessarily a trend. For trend, you need to have reasonable amount of time because trend is more a statistical assessment and analysis if there is really a pattern over the time. Quality and compliance risks, interview responses, for example, during an audit. And now how to analyze. So we analyze against regulations, company policies, SOPs, quality manual, guidelines. If the organization declares in their policies or SOPs they follow them, they should be followed. They are no longer a matter of choice, but if an organization decides, yes, the guidelines, we are going to follow them, then they should. The same applies to ISO standards. If the company chooses that accredited, they don't have to choose, but if they do, then these standards and the requirements are obligation. If they are not followed, they will lose the certification. Always common sense and basic logic are my best friends to analyze and evaluate. So does it make sense? Is it fit for purpose? Does it speak the way that we expect about the process, about its robustness? Do all these data talk the same language and tell the same story? Or are there contradictions? Sometimes taking the step back and trying different angle, different point of view, or trying to see it more from a bird-like view, it's very helpful not to look just at the tree, the one isolated thing, but the whole forest. Another thing we should be thinking about are the types of analysis, because for different situations, we may use different types. Gap analysis tells me is something where I take my point where I am now. I take the point where I want or I am supposed to be, and I'm trying to evaluate, is there a gap between my current state and the desired one? And where do I end up if I continue the way I've been going so far? Am I going to fall under the expectations, or am I going to meet the expectations? So the width of the gap indicates the amount of efforts to be made to bridge it and to get from the place where we are, apparently it's not the best place to be, or not leading us the right direction, to the place where we should be. Ishikawa, or fishbone diagram, is the two names for the same thing. It's suitable for quite complex processes where we can really put things like people, processes, procedures, equipment, environment, and so on and so forth, and then analyze within these domains to find out where the problem really is. Root cause analysis is actually part of fishbone, but it can be much simpler. 5 whys is a very favorite technique. We ask a question, get an answer, and we question the answer again, why? Very simple, but sometimes if we do it just 5 times, we may not reach the depth where the real root cause is. We may stay on a level above and then not address the proper root cause. How are we going to find out? Because the issue will repeat itself. Failure modes and effects analysis, that's predictive. I chart a process, I look at it, and I mean graphically chart, and I'm trying to find out where are the weak points, and then address the weak points to make sure that they are not going to break the chain. Trend analysis, again, is predictive. Where am I going to end? That's what we just said. We need some time and combination of all the above, because we may use this one in one situation and combine it with something else to get really as deep as possible to the true root cause. And how to evaluate? Typically, we take into account potential impact on various things like participant safety, well-being, confidentiality, data quality, study overall integrity, reliability of study outcomes and conclusions, fulfillment of contractual obligations, including the required quality that should be specified, effectiveness of CAPA implementation, regulatory compliance, adherence to our own company processes and procedures, information security. This is not all inclusive, there might be more things. And as I always say, the whole purpose is we want to have good processes, generate good data, fit for purpose data that will help making informed decisions for safe and effective products for consumers. And before we go to exam practice questions, Let me stop sharing so that we can see each other. And let me allow this time, or as much time as we may need, for your questions and answers. Because if we go through all, and perhaps some of them you've seen already and we did it together, it will eat up the time that you may wish to have to ask whatever question you may have about the situation, perhaps in your job, about the exam itself, about the purpose of the exam and what it's going to bring you. And sometimes there are some misconceptions about that. So I'm looking forward to your questions. Feel free to unmute and ask question or type it if you prefer typing it. And Michael, Pam, and me will try to help and answer. Anyone has a question they would like to ask? And don't be shy. No questions are stupid questions, only answers can be stupid. Nobody has any question. That's surprising. I saw yesterday some thumbs up to have the opportunity for questions, and now there are none. This is your time. So maybe before the first the test weighs heavy. What do you mean? Like it's difficult to pass it?
I feel like there's a lot of information there, and obviously going into a test is difficult. I mean, I have to admit, I got my certification 3 years ago, and I've been in auditing for so long, and I was still nervous about all of the information, make sure I have everything correct there. So that might be what they're thinking of.
I have a question here. What sections of the different regulations do you recommend focusing on the most, other than GCP, of course? It's mostly built on FDA regulations, meaning 21 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. Couple of questions, as far as I know, may be related to European regulations. The distinction is always made clear in the question. So if it's like related according to the EMA, then you will see EMA is mentioned there, the European Medicine Agency. You are not expected to remember the exact paragraph, article, subparagraph, or whatever. It's not a question like, where do I find this? And you are expected to say, this is 21 CFR Part 11, 320, Section 160, A to B. No, this is not the point. And maybe such section does not even exist. I just imagined something like that. So I would say GCP is the basic because it gives kind of approach and way of thinking. If you are very well versed in GCP E6, you should be able to get it right most of the time. Any other suggestion, Michael? Pam?
I think it's just the basic requirements of GCP, and it's going to be in the exam assessment handbook. The list of different sections of the regulations that are potentially covered. So it's going to be Part 50 and 56 and 312. The sections that relate to GCP as well as ICH. So that's really where we want to focus. And as Camilla said, it's the concepts and principles. It's not, they're not going to ask you to regurgitate what section of the regulation by section number.
If also, as a Canadian QA, I'm digging into the FDA regulations. What are all the parts of Title 21 to focus on? 312, 58, I think 54 or 55, because you have something about financial disclosures, IRBs, that's one of the 50s. Then you have 312 or 300 on generally is related to drugs. 800 on generally is related to devices and manufacturing.
Yeah, IRB and informed consent is 50 and 56, and financial disclosure is part 54. I don't think there's a lot of questions on financial disclosure, but you do need to be familiar with the aspects of it and what the expectations are.
Yeah, there may be something about IRBs, and that's also 58, I think, or
56. 56. 58 is GLP.
Ah, yes. I'm mixing it up myself. So yes, basically these 300 and then these 50s that Michael just mentioned. And another question, what about timelines like 30 days to notify? Do they ask a lot of those? I would expect there might be a question perhaps related to serious adverse event reporting. That's not something like 30 days. That's typically what we want from, even it's not defined in the GCP. I don't think it's even defined in CFR. But typically, since the sponsors have short time, if it's reportable further to the authorities, they have 7 days or 15 days, depending on what kind of event it is. They put 24 hours for the site to make sure they have enough time for the internal processing of the event information.
Yeah, what's in the regulations only relates to the requirements of sponsors reporting to the FDA. Sites and investigators report to the sponsors, as Camilla said, will be defined in the protocol. And it might be 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on the sponsor and how they write their protocols.
Yes, exactly. The 30-day notification that's more related to pharmacovigilance, if I'm not mistaken. At least it does not ring a bell. I'm not sitting in the US. I'm not working that much on the FDA regulations. So right now I can't remember what these 30 days may be referring to. I don't think it's too much about time. But I neither deny nor confirm, because honestly, I do not know. Lydia, maybe you have an idea if there are many questions asking about specific timelines or just a few. Lydia, I hope you can hear me. Maybe she has to leave her desk for a moment. So
Yeah, I think she said she would check back at the end of the meeting, so she might not
okay.
be.
Okay, so we will keep this question for her. Pam, you probably don't remember if there were questions.
No, and that's not exactly an ICH E6, that's an ICH E2A.
I'm saying that's PD, that's
Specific timeline.
pharmacovigilance.
But I don't remember. I think my brain blanked as I walked out of there after it was done.
Yeah, but it's more pharmacovigilance timelines than a GCP timeline. If you think about inspection and you are inspected and you get 483, then typically you have, I think it's 15 days to provide a written response, which is not obligatory to provide,
regulation,
but it's not advisable not to answer.
True. Okay, I think we have another question here. Parts of Title 21. I think you guys mentioned those specifically, yes. And I'm pretty sure they're in the handbook too. Probably 312 is IND. Michael, you had noted those. So I'm not sure part 11, I don't think there's anything on there.
It's included on the list. I don't remember if there's any specific questions about part 11 type issues, but
Maybe just an awareness.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a very short guideline. It's something like 13 pages. It does not hurt reading it and knowing about it. It's actually quite good to know.
And even something like 312, subpart D is very important for responsibilities for sponsors and investigators. That section is very large, but that one is really specific as to what those responsibilities are. And usually when we're auditing, that is certainly a specific area that we look at. And as noted before, IRBs, informed consent, financial disclosure. I can't remember which numbers pertain to which ones. I have my cheat book here, so.
Nice.
I love these books.
But where did you get it from?
I think it was teaching the advanced GCP for Quality College. We had requested those. Unfortunately, SQA does not provide those anymore, but has GCP. Let me back up. It has the 21 CFRs and then ICH, E2A and E6. So when E6R3 comes out, it'll be obsolete then.
Yes, you are right. Maybe we can just repeat generally about the exam. So you have 165 questions. 15 of them do not count. They are being tested, but you don't know which 15 are tested. So pay equal attention to every single one. When you sit there, read very carefully the question and all the answer options. There might be one word difference, or if you skip one word in a question and let's say the word is not, like not supposed to do, or which is not correct, but we somehow ignore this not, then we would be answering a totally different question and our answer would be logically wrong. Take the questions and answer those questions where you feel confident and comfortable. It will take you no time. Flag, and I think you can do it technically. It's an option to put a flag sign. Questions that you want to skip and return later. It may very well happen that you will answer a question that will give you a hint for that question that is waiting. So that's another good option. If you can exclude 2 answers, like obviously incorrect out of 4, and you are really not sure which one of the remaining 2 is the correct one, and maybe you don't really like either of them, give a guess, and you have 50% chance to be right. Instead of torturing your mind and trying to figure out. Do not change your answers after you answer all the questions. Typically, we make more mistakes and make more wrong choices than we do when we take our first shot. You have about 1 minute in an average per question, meaning if you do 20 questions very quickly, you collect extra time for the questions that seem more difficult. And you will have a chance to see all your answers before you finally submit. So it does not mean you cannot go back. Yes, you can go back when you have everything answered. You will have a view, and you will know, as we discussed yesterday, you will know immediately after submission, you will know the result. So no sleepless nights, no anxiety. How did I make it? Did I not make it? You will know at that moment. It's just that horrible second between the submit and the result appearing. My problem is I second guess myself and take too long per question. You are not the only one, trust me.
I think we all did it or do it. And what's
Try to
interesting is, um, I think, I mean, you've seen a lot of the questions here. You know, perhaps to time yourself if you put questions together, or, you know, go through it not quickly, but as you would during a test, and then go back and see what maybe led you astray for an incorrect answer also.
Yeah, read slow and tend to reread. There is nothing wrong about it. It just should not be way too slow to
I mean,
waste the time.
you do want to budget your time to make sure you can get through all the questions, but what you will find is there will be hopefully a large number of questions where you'll read them and you'll have pretty immediate confidence that you know the answer. So you won't spend a lot of time on those. And hopefully that leaves you enough time to focus on the ones where you need to think a little bit longer about what the correct answer is.
Okay, one of the questions on the practice exam has an answer that references the IVRS. Can you explain what it is? Interactive Voice Response System. It's now more web-based than voice, but IVRS was very widespread in managing supplies in clinical trials. You literally dialed phone number, and you have, if you ever get through these like bank systems or many companies, they have this kind of thing. You call, and first, before you get anywhere, you get, if you want this, press 1. If you want this, press 2. If you want that, press 3. So these choices were helping to navigate. If you want to randomize a patient, if you want to assign new drug kit to a patient. So it was used to manage the supplies and the assigned treatment per study participant. It's, as I said, it's not that much used anymore. You may have even randomization to arms, not to a specific kit. And it's most of the time nowadays it's web-based. But in principle, it's the same thing. It helps to allocate appropriate treatment to the correct patient.
It's also used on the back end by sponsors and CROs to know whether they need to ship additional supplies to the site, because it's tracking inventory. And as when you check off that a bottle or kit has been allocated to a patient, it automatically triggers reshipping if needed. So it's really good for supply management as well, not only tracking randomization.
Correct, correct. Yes, that's a very important point. And just as a matter of life experience, this is typically programmed the resupply trigger level on a global level, meaning it might be fitting a place where there are no customs barriers, for example. And if you are in a country that needs some procedures for importation, it would not work correctly for you. So if you are reviewing something, or if you see a lot of problems, you are auditing and you see a lot of problems with supplies, the reason may be that the trigger level, which is set by the system as 1 for the whole study, is not fitting your particular geography. That might be the way to look and to drive more investigation and attention. The other thing may be that it can be used for if you have, for example, certain lead-in dose, and then it changes after some time. Again, this is managed through IVRS, and again, it may allocate different strengths of the medication to sites. If there is an error in the programming, it will keep allocating, like supplying the sites with strengths they don't need and having not enough strength of medication they do need. Again, typically there is a problem with the programming somewhere.
A lot of times I think it's we're dating ourselves with IVRS because that was telephone, but a lot of times it's just called IRT now,
Yeah.
also interactive response technology. And like you said, it can be for randomization, stratification, correct IP
Allocations.
distribution, also just in time. That was when it came on board, that it was instead of well, I remember, shipping bulk drugs to the country, and this allows a just in time better distribution. Also expiration dates, it tracks those, which is really good because that can be pulling that IP off the shelf or quarantining it, that type of thing. So, and I was looking at the question. It says, what process should be performed prior to the investigational product being destroyed at the site or returned to the sponsor? And I'm not sure why the IVRS system would be noted in there, except that it should just be the drug accountability. Really is the overarching process that needs to be done to ensure that all of the IP has been returned by the patient to the site, and therefore an accountability done before it's shipped back to the sponsor, the manufacturer, or destroyed on site.
Yeah, we don't have the choices, but that would be what I would think is that, drug accountability has been reconciled and closed out before you destroy it.
Which can be done through IRT.
Yes. Well, it's done locally, but it's often recorded in the IRT as well.
Yeah. I've actually seen lately is monitors can get a printout of all the IP, and then they do a cross check before it's packaged up, which is really nice. If it's years of IP that's been sitting there, it hasn't been accounted for previously.
And there should be the complete reconciliation, which goes more. For reconciliation, you have the quantity sent to the site. Some of it may never have been used because it expired or there were less participants enrolled than expected. So you have the unused part, then you have the used returned, and then you have the consumed part. So the unused, returned, and used by the participants in a sum should equal what was sent to the site. If there is any discrepancy and if these numbers are not matching, then somewhere is a problem. Is it better to get all right or finish the test? Okay, I would say this is not the best question. The question is it better to get most right and finish the test, or to finish the test and not answer all because you just ran out of time? So if you can do it, get all right and finish the test, that's the perfect situation. You may not be in this perfect situation, but if you get most right and finish, you still may be passing. IRB applications and approvals. Again, a lot can be specific depending on the location. That's one thing. The other thing is typically what is expected everywhere, whether it's United States, outside United States, any geography I can imagine and I experience it. You have the initial submission before any participant can be enrolled, before the initiation may happen. It's the initial submission and the assessment, the response from the IRB might be comments, might be further clarifications. They may want changes in the informed consent, for example, and so on and so forth. But without that IRB approval, the site should never be initiated and should never start enrolling participants. If they do, it's a critical problem. So this is the initial approval. And then the second part, and the second IRB responsibility is periodic review. And still, you may not in all countries, you would have like expiry date of the approval. And then it says, okay, this is the initial approval. It's valid for 1 year. And by this date, which is typically like 4 to 8 weeks ahead of that expiry date, you need to submit a progress report and safety information and so on and so forth to get the ongoing assessment and the green light to continue the study. Typically, there are some payments involved and so on. And then some things are just notification, meaning like you have administrative amendment, let's say new address in a protocol or a new lab added, but there is no implication whatsoever facing the participant. For the participant, nothing changes. So the informed consent does not need to be revised because the change does not affect anyhow the patient experience. So for that, we typically send a notification, or there might be some general update that we do not really need any kind of approval. For example, renewed insurance. We don't need an approval from the IRB, but we should notify the IRB. With the notification, I do not expect formal response. With submission, I do expect formal response, and I should not implement the change without the approval unless the change was implemented to prevent immediate hazard to the parties. That's the only exception. But again, there should be detailed information, why, what happened, and so on and so on. Changes in risk-benefit assessments, changes in shelf life of the product being tested, and so on. And finally, the IRB should get, at the end of the study, like a summary, and most of the time it's on the site level, the IRB, which is responsible for a particular site. So they are not necessarily interested on the global perspective of the study, or they want it just for information. But from that side, they want details. They want deviations that were committed. They want serious adverse event to be reported. Typically, these requirements are listed in the initial approval. And the IRB may change them depending on how they see the risks in the study, what type of product is it? Is it novel? Is it already marketed and this is a new indication, and so on and so forth. So the IRB should specify what they expect to be reported, when and how.
And usually, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Usually the IRBs will also provide a little bit of guidance. Some of the larger central IRBs will tell you exactly what they expect to see. Possibly not every single AE. I know they got away from that.
I know one that wants that.
Yeah, and so they will tell you what is needed to send to them. You know, sometimes protocol deviations, sometimes safety, like CIOMS reports, that type of thing. So that's a really good thing to take a look at to see once you're approved by that IRB. Also expect to see for every single ICF that is utilized for the study to ensure that it's approved before it's utilized. That can get really complicated sometimes when you have multiple amendments, possible languages also. So that type of thing is important, and reach out to the IRB. They're more than happy to explain things to you on what needs to be, submitted. And as an auditor going in, a lot of times reading that initial approval letter will tell you also what some of the expectations are. So, knowing that, what to look for, because things don't always get printed out. So on.
Some IRBs may be less experienced in some countries, and in many parts of the world, you cannot communicate with the IRB. You do it only through the principal investigator. They never talk to you. So seeing IRB as a vendor that is qualified by a sponsor, maybe audited, it's only in the United States. If you are sitting
Interesting, thank you.
in almost all the other geographies, it's absolutely unthinkable.
Oh boy, that would be a gaffe, wouldn't it?
There's a question about should the ICF be revised if the drug is approved for the indication under study, or is the notification to the site to share with patients sufficient? Well, the regulations about informed consent say if new information becomes available, patients should be advised of that. How do you share it with the patients? Do you revise the ICF or just a notification? That's going to be a decision by the IRB. So it's expected that the investigator or the sponsor would notify the IRB of this new information, and the IRB would decide, how to communicate that or disseminate that to the patients. And you're going to get different answers in different places. So there really is no one answer to that question.
It's more the situation like you have a study with a specific product, let's say IV product, but in the meantime, the sponsor competitor gets for the same indication new drug approved. Then is it our obligation to inform the participant because there is a new therapeutic option, and we are saying in GCP that in such situations the patients should be informed about therapeutic options outside the study? Honestly, I typically see this information in the beginning, so it says, and a very vague in the information, like saying you can discuss your further therapeutic options with your study doctor, and that's that. Because sometimes there are so many other drugs for, let's say, cardiovascular indications. So we do not even list all of them or all possible chemotherapies in oncology studies. And I have never seen, let's say, a new drug comes to the market for, say, lung cancer, and we have a study in lung cancer, and we have new informed consent to tell the patients that this new drug is approved for lung cancer. I have never seen that, never in my life. It would be an interesting discussion, I would say more academic discussion than anything else, whether it should be done or whether it's the doctor's responsibility to inform the patient. On the other hand, if the patient is doing well on the investigation of drug, there might be no need. But if the patient is not doing well and it's in the best interest of the patient to go out of the study, then I would definitely expect the doctor to explain all, including the newest therapeutic options. And again, you have different approval timelines in different geographies and reimbursement negotiations. So yes, it may be available, but it's not reimbursed. So there are so many different scenarios. That's perhaps why we keep quite general in the informed consent. Can we request IRB SOPs? Yes. Would the IRB give them? It depends. Some IRBs are very transparent and they even put it on their website. They have their meetings, they have their membership, they have their members' professional qualifications, CVs and everything. Some of them don't. And they would not answer such a request. But it does not hurt to ask.
I think the important thing would be to justify why you want to see them. And do you want all SOPs or maybe just the SOP about creating a consent or something? I mean, what are you looking for?
And it also depends whether you are in the States and you are sent to audit the IRB, then yes, definitely you would ask for the SOPs. And as I said, in other places, you can't even think about it. So there is no universal answer.
Interesting. I learn something new every day now. Until you've come across the issue, sometimes you don't know. You make the assumption that, oh, everybody does the same thing. So
And I ran into an IRB last year, so it was in Kenya. And it's a huge IRB, dozens of members. And I was thinking, how on earth is this IRB operating? And the explanation I got, they have groups or teams or subparts of this IRB, and each of them focuses on reviewing and approving or rejecting different types of studies. So they are really specialized on certain study types. The IRB is one as a body, but it has all these. So you need also to know to which subgroup you should be submitting.
Oh, boy, yeah, I've seen the ones that, some of the big ones, and they have actually started, like, in the US putting Canadian members on so that they can review Canadian protocols also. But usually it's just into that group, and then they disseminate it. They have many boards, as they call them, and you can actually review when you get the approval a lot of times which board actually reviewed it. And so there are, board A, board B, board C, or 1, 2, 3, or something like that.
Brings one interesting question. IRB, if I read GCP, I understand it correctly, they should be very well familiar with the site. They should be able to reach the site easily. They actually should be auditing the study at the site. If it's a US IRB and the site is in Canada, it will be a little bit difficult. Or if it's a kind of IRB that has a huge region, do they really fulfill this expectation? I know IRBs that review and audit every single study that is conducted in the institution.
Well, the US regulations say the IRB can conduct the audits, but it doesn't say that they have to do it themselves. And so some of the big central IRBs use consultants and contractors to fulfill that requirement, and which meets the spirit and intent of the regulation. So that's fine. You don't have to send an IRB member on an airplane to go visit that site. They can hire somebody local to do that.
Would they do it also for some like initial site assessments? Because they should basically say that this site is adequate to perform the study.
They could, and the regulations say you can audit, but when I've audited IRBs, big and small, central and local, most of them do few, if any, audits. And so, although they can, the reality is it doesn't happen that often.
Who would pay for that, by the way?
Well, that's another question. Who's paying for it?
It's interesting. I've also learned something just now.
Yeah, and what I have found also, like institutions, such as cancer centers or universities, they have their own, not only an IRB, but usually like a research committee, perhaps, that they need to review. And I would bet that they would probably review more of those studies internally, because it's very easy to do that on location, and they have their own rules for that. So.
Now we have a question, should central IRB be used for a study? What are differences between central and local? Again, this depends on the country and its regulatory landscape. I know countries where there are local IRBs, meaning they are associated with each institution. I even know of some places these IRBs and these institutions, they need to be accredited by a regulatory body to be allowed to operate and do research. It's not everywhere, but in some countries it is. So IRB, it's institutional review board, meaning it's somehow associated with the institution. Central IRB could be for the whole country. And you may have countries, you have central IRB and regulatory authority. You don't have local. The local is not obligatory, but many of the sites, they do it because they feel it's a good thing to do, although it's not required. In some countries, by default, you have all 3 levels. And in some countries, you don't have the central IRB, or you have regional IRB. So again, it depends. But central means there is Typically, there might be many sites, as many as could be involved in the study in that particular country, but local would be associated or affiliated somehow with that particular institution that is conducting the study.
So there's a question about whether if there's only one non-affiliated member, do they have to be at every meeting? That's a very interesting research question. If you look at the FDA regulations, it says there should be a non-affiliated member on the committee, but the regulations also state that person does not count for quorum and voting purposes. However, if you're reviewing research that has potential broad implications for the population and the community, it's probably a really good idea that the non-affiliated person be there. This question came up. I was doing an audit at a large institution where their non-affiliated person was missing most of the meetings, and I sent a question to the FDA, and I got a response back from the GCP office that says, although that person does not count for quorum, doesn't need to be there, FDA views it very negatively if you're reviewing broad implication research without that person at the meeting. And I did a search of, you can go on FDA's webpage and search all the citations for 43s by the section. And I searched on that topic, and there were, in the last 10 years, there were about 25 483 citations to IRBs for having meetings without the non-affiliated person present, because again, not fulfilling the spirit and intent of the requirements, even though that person doesn't count for voting and quorum purposes. So they view it as important.
Makes a lot of sense. You are muted, Pam.
I mean, there's a reason that there's a requirement that that person be there.
But it's interesting, although they're required to be there, they don't count for voting and quorum purposes. So you can theoretically have a meeting without them there. You know, when I talk to IRBs, I say, you know, if they miss a meeting here or there, that's one thing, but I wouldn't want it to be a pattern of behavior. And at this institution where I was doing the audit, this person was missing for more than half the meetings. I said, how do you justify reviewing community-based research without the community-based person there? And they didn't have a good answer.
So did you make it a finding?
Yes, but I had to qualify it. Although not required, it's best practice, and FDA views it negatively if that person's missing. And so maybe you want to have a stricter internal policy that, you know, that person's always there. And of course, if you have more than one member on the committee who's not affiliated, if one of them can't make it, at least you're covered with the other person. Where it becomes a problem is when you have smaller institutions where the whole committee is only made up of 7 or 8 people. So if one person's missing, you know, if it's one of the key people, you got a problem, even though you may still meet quorum.
Yeah.
You know, so it comes down, and a lot of it I know comes down to the question of budget and timing and availability and all those other things.
Lydia, since you are back, there was a question if there are many questions in the exam about specific timelines. Let's say this or that should be within, I don't know, 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, whatever. Nobody of us remembers. Do you have any idea?
Was that directed to me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had not turned things back on yet. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the content of the exam.
No, it was only a question if there are such questions and if there are numerous, that was all.
My best guess would be that there are not numerous questions on any one specific topic, but again, unfortunately, I can't speak to the content of the exam.
Okay.
Yeah, and I took the exam way too many years ago to remember.
Camilla, I need to run to another meeting and.
Okay,
So
okay.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
and
much.
Best
Thank you.
of luck. Drop off here.
We still have 3 minutes.
Mhm.
So if there are any other questions, anything else you would like to bring up or double check, and or organizational, since we have Lydia here, although you can reach out to her by email if you want to take the opportunity. And as I mentioned before, we are planning to run a survey after you take the exam, so probably something like May, not to be too long after. And we would definitely ask you to spend a couple of minutes and answer that survey. That is meant for us to get a feedback on these study groups and what to improve, what you saw particularly valuable, what you saw like did not really bring any value to us, tips for improvements, your overall feeling about the exam. We would really appreciate it. So when you see that coming, please do not delete it without opening. I think that we want more. Should ICF be revised?
I think we answered that question
Oh,
earlier.
we answered that one. For some reason, it appears to me as the last one, which I was awesome. Thank you, Katie. Wish you all the best of success. Stay calm. Don't be anxious. Even if you don't get it, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
And you can do it again. I know there's some investment behind, but sometimes I remember exams at the university. I failed and I had to repeat. I've learned the most. So it's not a great experience. I would love to keep repeating, but it has its value. So try to find a value in it.
Yeah, one last question. Is it worthwhile to review the operations field manual? It's very good reading. It's really long. I'm not sure there's any questions that would be based on, that's more FDA internal policy, but it does, point out some things that are important during inspections, but I don't know that you would find anything directly from that that would be helpful. Also, it's well, the sections that are relevant to inspections is probably about 30 or 40 pages. So, you want to watch the clock, but don't focus on the clock. It is a timed exam, but go through the questions that you are really comfortable with, answer those, then go back to the ones that you think need more thinking. And you should have enough time to get through all the questions and within the time frame specified.
Yeah, and you would see the clock on your screen, so no worries about it. For the manual, I would say it will be more useful in your daily work if you are preparing for an inspection, or if you have some kind of brief, what are the most common findings and where to focus your work and the efforts of your organization in terms of compliance. That would be definitely.
And they have 3 hours. Is that correct, Lydia, for the whole exam?
3.5.
3.5. Okay. So you have 3.5 hours and there's 160 questions. So
65.
150, 165 questions. So, but again, there's some questions you're going to look at and you're going to right away know the answer. So, answer those, go on, and then spend the remaining time on the ones that maybe you need to think about. You really shouldn't run out of time, but so keep an eye on the clock, but don't panic when you look at the clock.
The time should be okay.
Okay, I think
if there are no more questions,
we've run out of time and questions. So
then again, wish you the best of success and more implementing what you've learned during the study preparation, perhaps during these discussions we have here for your work, and keep in mind the reason why we do what we do, to get good products to the people who need them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Michael. Thank all of you. And maybe for some of you who are preparing, not for now, but for fall, we will meet again. Thank you so much.